Where I was going to start was, and for any engineers in the room, there's kind of a typical engineering reliability progression where you move from kind of a reactive to a planned to a predictive maintenance environment. And really the discussion that I want to have, and the thing that we have tried to do it as a sourcing organization within SDI for our clients in the MROs, bring reliability thinking into the strategy. So we went back to our engineering counterparts and said, well, let's talk about reliability. What does that mean in your environment? How do you move from an environment where reliability is a challenge to one in which you're now more proactively managing it? What I did was I adopted that slide a little bit, and I looked at it and said, well, you know, entry kind of procurement, you're being reactive, you're placing the purchase order. You start to get into a planned mode where you now have some strategic relationships. You're beginning to focus on where you need to be headed. And really then the next thing is to drive that next level of thinking within the supply and how you approach the supply base from a strategic perspective to engage your suppliers in that reliability discussion. It's really kind of an area where, you know, we've long been challenged as procurement by either our leadership or by ourselves to maybe move beyond that state to a state of engagement or understanding or collaboration and kind of move beyond the traditional focus on cost reduction, and let's really focus on business outcomes. So move to that, what are the outcomes of the business? So we want to really approach this from whether it's a supply chain for MRO, whether it's a supply chain for IT solutions or temporary labor, how do you drive that into be reliable, scalable for your business? How do you bring that orientation to what you're doing? But really what we ought to do is define reliability. Nice big blue button. So reliability, I'm going to read this because it's the definition that I think is the most accurate. It's the likelihood that a process, product, and people will carry out their stated function for a specific time when operated according to designed conditions. That's reliability. That's a big mouthful. So you got to really begin to break that down into what is the stated function? What is that role? What are the desired outcomes and how do we get there? What are the steps that we need to move along in our relationship and how we engage the supply base, in my particular perspective, to drive that element of reliability that is needed by our operations or our manufacturing folks? So this is an area certainly hard to measure. How do you measure and how do you look at procurement as supporting reliability? You know, it's not your traditional cost savings. It's not some of the things that we've heard talked about in other means, you know, growing revenue. This is in that core of what is the rest of that business, the manufacturing, the operations of a business. So these are some areas that can be a real challenge. Obviously, since I come at this from an MRO perspective, there's a very busy chart, great graphics from our marketing department. But really, as we engage with clients, we see that there's so many things that affect reliability. There's so many variables. Do you have the right part? Is it in the right quantity? Did it come at the right time? Is it available when it's needed? Can the amount of time be reduced to that is spent looking for parts? So that we're driving reliability. We've got the maintenance people doing the things that they need to do when they need to do them, rather than chasing after something. So looking at this in the holistic way. So what we really need to look at is, as sourcing folks, is how do I look at what I'm buying and from whom I'm buying it, and how do I think about those buying relationships, those activities in the context of driving reliability for my clients. So that means, excuse me, but that means we need to look at it a little differently. Again, beautiful graphics. So we've got to look at our supply chain in a bit more of an end-to-end perspective. So right, with procurement in the middle, looking over at inventory management, critical spares and storeroom operations, and saying, what is my role as a supply chain manager, as a procurement leader in those areas? How do I work with finance? How do I work with operations? How do I work with my supply base to drive that on the left-hand side? Then on the right-hand side, as you look at warranty, repair, and strategy, or asset criticality and root cause failure analysis, that's really more with the engineering side of the business. What's happening there? How do those things play back into the supply base so that I'm driving reliability and that type of thinking across all of my engagements? But before we can get there, the one thing that everybody loves to talk about, and everybody refers to it as big data. If you look at MRO, it is probably, at least from our opinion, one of the more complex data environments because of the sheer number of parts from the number of suppliers across a multitude of systems. So in a typical engagement, we're dealing with a client's ERP system, whether that's Oracle, SAP. We're looking at their asset management system, Maximo, 7i, AssetWorks, other types of systems. And what you can see then, and then there's the procurement system that we engage. Well, what you can see across multiple clients and multiple plants is the fact that data becomes something that is highly irregular and inconsistent. So really, in order to build the foundation that is needed to drive the kind of thinking, it becomes about how do you capture data? How do you validate it? How do you enrich it, enhance it, standardize it so that it's something useful across every segment of the business? So that when the manufacturing and maintenance folks are dealing with that data, it's the same thing that's coming back to the procurement team. It's the same thing that's then going out to the supply base so that they can execute and deliver what is needed. The other piece of a reliability-oriented saving strategy, and the context is, wow, this is such a nice simple chart. Inputs and outputs, right? What are those inputs? And that is the understanding of what is client demand and what is the in the client production environment. So we need to work back to understand, in order to build that reliable supply chain and reliability around this, what's going on in that demand space? How is that affecting their production? Where is that shutdown going to be? Where are those other things that are needed in order to manage through the process and maybe manage through product changes in their environment as they roll along? So now I'm going to get to some more specific factors to consider when building this reliability-centered sourcing strategy. So there's some great things on here, but I'm really going to focus on 4 primary elements. One of them is warranty and warranty management. I think we all have bought something at home electronics, and there's a warranty. And I don't know if you're like me, I don't always fill out the warranty card. I don't always get it mailed in. But when I do, that's great. But then the question is, do I remember that I have that warranty when the thing breaks? And do I actually call up the manufacturer and have them replace the item or give me something in that? So think about that in the context of warranty on items when you have maybe 10,000 items in your storeroom. How do you track in a reliable way the warranty on those items? And are those in-service warranties or are they delivery warranties? Makes a big difference, because you need to understand how long might that item sit on the shelf. How am I driving that reliability of understanding I've got a reliable way to replace that and a warranted part and understand what the impacts of it are. The other one that is in parallel to what I've been talking about is component shelf life or replacement. Some of the things that we buy that go into a manufacturing environment have a very defined life. So we need to understand when they've arrived, how they're aging out, and what we need to do about those items that are aging out, so that when maintenance comes and pulls that item, they're not pulling something that's out of date and therefore is not eligible to be put back into the manufacturing line. So what do we do about those things? How do we engage the supply base? Again, there are opportunities to look at how you flip that back out to the original provider of that item, because they may have a customer in need of that in a more timely manner. So we're looking at those items. The other one is failure analysis, and that root cause and understanding from an engineering perspective, and what's the communication path back from within the organization back to the supply base? How do we communicate that, and for what purposes? It's not just to beat the supplier over the head. Sure, we may want a replacement part, but what we're really seeking is to communicate the information back to them that in our environment, in this specific instance, this application, this is the failure that we had. How do we improve that so that we don't see that again? Again, thinking about that engagement across it. And then the last piece of it is to look at your sourcing strategy and to look at how you run your business from a preventative maintenance planning and scheduling perspective. What does that mean to my buying patterns? What does that mean to how I engage in the marketplace? What does that mean to how I source items and price items? So when we begin to work with our engineering and maintenance teams and our operations teams to be more predictable in where we're doing maintenance and when we're doing it, rather than this reactive, oh, line's down, we've got to do something and it's a crisis, it gives us the opportunity to plan, schedule, and deliver value as a result. So how does this really work? It's just a quick case study. So one of our clients is an advanced medical device manufacturing organization. They're global, got a very diverse set of products that they build. And so we tried to take this concept of reliability, somewhat in its infancy in this particular client environment, and we said, okay, well, what is the reality of where they're at? Some of these are pretty basic procurement things, right? There's a cost and productivity challenge, and they've got a pretty fragmented supply base. Those are the things we're probably pretty good at as supply chain professionals. It's a GMP environment. There's certain requirements around it. So what did we do? We took the approach of bringing together the sourcing, engineering, operations, and supplier personnel. Not all that innovative. And sure, we did some supply-based consolidation. But what we really tried to drive in these communications was a focus on value beyond the cost reduction. So what we did was we sat with our suppliers and said, you've got price immunity. We're not going to come back to you and have a discussion around price. But what you've got to commit on the other side is that you're fully in to help us look at how do we drive greater levels of reliability, productivity, quality in the process and in the tooling that you manufacture for us. Bring your ideas to the table. Help us. Don't be afraid to suggest something that maybe means you sell less tools. Well, we'll talk about how that impact and what the opportunities are, but does it improve the client environment? Does it solidify the relationship that you have as a supplier in this place? So what were the outcomes? Yay for procurement. We got some six-figure cost reductions. It was great. We were able to leverage the supply base, do a little bit of reduction, a little bit of consolidation, had some discussion around price. Then we stopped. And then we had the next set of conversations. And we filled that pipeline of projects. And that is a seven-figure savings number. That's the kind of savings that gets your executive management's attention, because that's the long-term sustainable savings. That's the real value. What we did in this environment was we changed the throughput. We changed the quality. We changed the reliability of the tool so that it had to be replaced less often. And the supplier was the one that generated many of these ideas. They changed the angle of the way the tooling approached the product that was being manufactured. And by doing so, numerous things changed. And it drove a more reliable quality production environment, one that was highly productive and one that saved and will continue to save millions of dollars for the client. So it's coming at the supply chain, it's coming at your sourcing strategy, at least in our space, of looking at that end to end and saying, how do I change my interactions with my suppliers, and how do I change my strategy of how I engage with suppliers to drive reliability, productivity, and those types of enhancements, at least in our space, in the MRO world.